listening to Full Circle Weekly News. These articles are compiled by Eric the Unready, and I'm your host, Moss Bliss. This is episode 389, covering week 42, October 14th to 20th, 2024. The free vector graphics editor Inkscape 1.4 is out. The editor provides flexible drawing tools and provides support for reading and saving images in SVG, Open Document Drawing, DXF, WMF, EMF, SK1, PDF, EPS, PostScript, and PNG formats. Ready-made builds of Inkscape are prepared for Linux as AppImage, Snap, and Flatpak, Mac OS, and Windows. The Qt Company has published the Qt 6.8 framework, which continues to work on stabilizing and expanding the functionality of the Qt 6 branch. Qt 6.8 provides support for Windows 10 Plus, Mac OS 12 Plus, Linux, iOS 16 Plus, Android 9 Plus, WebOS, WebAssembly, Integrity, VxWorks, FreeRTOS, and QNX. The source code of the Qt components is provided under the LGPL v3 and GPL v2 licenses. Qt 6.8 is an LTS release where updates will be generated for 5 years for commercial license holders, 2 years longer than previous LTS releases. For non-commercial users, the maintenance period will be 6 months or until a new major release is generated. Support for Qt 6.5 will last until May 2026, and support for Qt 6.2 will end on September 30th, 2024. The Qt 5.15 branch will be supported until May 2025. Solus 4.6 has been published. It develops its own installer, package manager, and configurator. Solus 5 is developed on the technologies of the Serpent OS distribution. The code is distributed under the GPL v2 license using C and Vala languages for development. Builds with Budgie, GNOME, KDE Plasma, and XFCE desktops are provided for the x86-64 platform. The distribution follows a hybrid development model whereby major releases are released periodically, but between major releases the distribution uses a rolling package update model. The OpenSSH developers have continued to split SSHD into several separate executable files. In the first stage of the split, implemented in May, functions related to session processing were moved from SSHD into a separate process SSHD-session, and only the functionality necessary for accepting a new network connection and starting an SSHD-session for each new session was left in SSHD. This week a change was made to the OpenSSH codebase, adding another process, SSHD-auth, removing the code from SSHD-session. The SSHD-auth process is started from SSHD-session and allows additional isolation of authentication-related data in the address space of a separate process, which prevents access to this data in memory in the event of attacks on the code used to handle the connection stages before authentication is complete. In addition, the change slightly reduces memory consumption, since authentication-related code is now present in memory only during authentication and is then unloaded. The SSHD-auth process uses a random recomposition of the executable file during each boot of the operating system. Random recomposition makes it difficult to predict the shifts of functions in executable files and libraries, which complicates the creation of exploits using return-oriented programming methods. When using the ROP technique, the attacker does not try to place his code in memory, but operates on existing pieces of machine instructions ending with a return instruction, usually the ends of functions. The exploit's work comes down to building a chain of calls to similar blocks to obtain the desired functionality. Intel and AMD have announced the creation of an advisory group to advance innovation in the x86 ecosystem, including Linus Torvalds and Tim Sweeney. The group also includes representatives from Broadcom, Dell, Google, Hewlett-Packard, Lenovo, Meta, Microsoft, Oracle, and Red Hat. The key objective of the initiative is to work together to ensure compatibility between platforms, simplify software development for x86 systems, and identify developer needs for extending the architecture. The goal is to support the development of the x86 architecture as a computing platform that is in demand by developers and consumers. The group is expected to help bring together industry leaders and the interests of both hardware and software communities to shape the future of the architecture and provide developers with a more unified set of instructions and architectural interfaces. The group's areas of interest include solutions for data centers, client systems, cloud services, embedded devices, machine learning, and 3D graphics. The expected outcome is improved compatibility between software and hardware, simplified architectural guidelines and standardized interfaces across Intel and AMD products, and more efficient integration of new hardware capabilities into operating systems, frameworks, and applications. Cellar Door Games announced the publication of the source code for Rogue Legacy, a 2D platformer with roguelike and fantasy elements. The game was released for Windows, Mac OS, Linux, PlayStation 3/4/Vita, and Nintendo Switch. The code is written in C# and is distributed under a specific license that allows compilation and modification for personal use, but requires permission if you intend to distribute your own build of the game. Only the code without game resources can be transferred from your copy of the game. The proposed code is designed to use the FNA package with an open implementation of the Microsoft XNA Game Studio 4.0 refresh libraries. Work is underway to port the game to the SDL3 library. The Fuyin 0.8 music player has been released, aimed at providing wide possibilities for customizing and adapting the program to your preferences. Fuyin offers a set of widgets with the implementation of various modes for managing the music collection and playing music. Additional features can be connected in the form of plugins. A configurator for the layout of elements on the screen is offered for customizing the interface. The project is written in C++ using the Qt library and is distributed under the GPLv3 license. Ready-made packages are formed for Fedora, Debian, and Ubuntu. Supported playback of files in FLAC, MP3, MP4, Vorbis, Opus, WavePack, Wave, AIFF, MusePack, Monkeys Audio, VGM, and various track formats. Fuyin's capabilities include extracting information about the order and duration of audio tracks from CUE files, gapless playback, creating, importing, and exporting playlists in M3U/M3U8 formats, filtering the contents of the music library by any fields, tree view of the collection, tag editing, visualization using spectrograms, navigation at the directory level in the file system with the ability to directly play selected files. The MPRIS dbus interface can be used for external control of the player. The ForgeJo 9.0 collaborative development platform has been published. It allows you to deploy a system for collaborative work with Git repositories on your servers, similar to GitHub, Bitbucket, and GitLab. ForgeJo is a fork of the Git project, which in turn branched off from the GOGS platform. ForgeJo was separated in 2022 after attempts to commercialize Git and the transfer of control to a commercial company. The ForgeJo project adheres to the principles of independent management and community control. Git hosting Codeberg.org has switched to using ForgeJo. The project code is written in Go and is distributed under the MIT license. The key features of the platform are low resource consumption and a simple installation process. It provides typical project capabilities such as task management, issue tracking, pull requests, wiki, tools for coordinating developer groups, preparing releases, automating package placement in repositories, managing access rights, interfacing with continuous integration platforms, code search, authentication via LDAP and OAuth, access to the repository via SSH and HTTP/HTTPS protocols, connecting webhooks for integration with Slack, Discord, and other services, support for Git hooks and Git LFS, tools for migrating and mirroring repositories. The ability to use the ActivityPub protocol to write individual developer servers into a federated network is also highlighted. Oracle has published MySQL 9.1.0. MySQL Community Server 9.1.0 builds are available for all major Linux, FreeBSD, Mac OS, and Windows distributions. MySQL 9.1 is assigned to the Innovation branches, which will also include the next major release, MySQL 9.2. Innovation branches are recommended for those who want to get access to new functionality earlier, are published every 3 months, and supported only until the next major release is published. An LTS release will be formed next summer, recommended for implementation that require predictability and long-term preservation of unchanged behavior. Following an LTS branch, a new innovation branch will be formed, MySQL 10.0. FStack 1.24 has been released, a user space revision of the FreeBSD network stack that uses the DPDK framework to achieve maximum performance. The project was created by Tencent, China's largest telecommunications company, and is used in its products and services. The code is written in C and is distributed on the BSD license. Linux and FreeBSD are supported. FStack allows you to use your own local network stack and applications, independent of the operating system network stack, functioning in the user space and working directly with network equipment. FStack is positioned as a solution that allows you to increase the performance of network request handlers in conditions where the standard TCP/IP stack of the Linux kernel becomes a bottleneck and limits scaling. In some situations, the project makes it possible to increase the number of small network requests processed several times. Theoretically, FStack allows you to reach the ceiling of network performance possible for the network card used. Increased performance is achieved by eliminating such operations as copying network packets, scheduling threads, processing interrupts, and using system calls. To interact with the network card, bypassing the operating system kernel interfaces, the DPDK framework is used, which develops a set of libraries for low-level work with network adapters. DPDK makes it possible to reduce overhead costs and keep to a minimum a number of CPU cycles when receiving or sending network packets. The project supports FStack converted versions of the Nginx 1.25.2 multi-protocol server and Redis 6.2.6 DBMS, which demonstrate performance superior to regular builds running on top of the system network stack. On October 20th, 2004, the first version of the Ubuntu 4.10 Warty Warthog distribution was published based on NP Linux. The project was founded by Mark Shuttleworth, a millionaire South African contributor to Debian, who was inspired by the idea of creating an accessible desktop distribution for end users with a predictable fixed development cycle. Several developers from the Debian project were involved in the work, some of whom are still involved in both projects. The Ubuntu 4.10 release, which shipped GNOME 2.8, Firefox 0.9, and OpenOffice.org 1.1.2, remains available for download. Intel has announced efforts to add support for platforms based on Intel Xeon 6 Granite Rapids processors to the Coreboot project, which develops a free alternative to proprietary firmware and BIOS. The work is being carried out jointly with 9 Elements, a company specializing in adapting Coreboot to various equipment. Coreboot plans to prepare a firmware support package, including the implementation of procedures necessary for initialization and configuring systems with Intel Xeon 6 processors. It is expected that the work carried out will make Coreboot-based solutions more attractive for corporate systems and bring them to the level of open platform firmware projects from the Open Compute community. It is noted that the use of Coreboot will enable companies to simplify the hardware initialization process, reduce maintenance costs, and adapt the boot components to their needs, which is especially important when implementing software-defined infrastructures in data centers. Intel also mentions that Coreboot enables high performance, efficiency, and security of workloads and promotes innovation and collaboration across the industry. Coreboot achieves higher performance than proprietary UEFI firmware due to its minimalist modular architecture that initializes only the necessary hardware components. Coreboot also reduces boot times by using Linux Boot to directly transfer control to the Linux kernel without the need for additional bootloaders or firmware. Malabal, a laptop company, has harshly criticized the Coreboot community and called for the project to be stopped. In addition, Malabal has refused to use AMD processors since the Coreboot leader is employed by AMD, and has stopped supplying products to Germany, Poland, and Texas since 9 Elements AMD and 3M Deb are registered there, and Malabal representatives were unhappy with their interactions with them. Moreover, Malabal has promised to ban anyone who supports the Coreboot project, transfers code to it, sends donations, or participates in its work. A Malabal representative also complained about the high cost of consulting services related to Coreboot and stated that in more than 6 months of joint work, not a single line of code has been written related to the adaptation of Coreboot for Malabal laptops. The leader of the Coreboot project expressed surprise at such attacks since Malabal had not paid anyone a penny, no contracts had been concluded with it, and no technical specifications had been drawn up. All interaction had been reduced to a free analysis of the work already done in Malabal, after which the companies involved in consulting related to Coreboot simply refused to work with Malabal. Christian Walter, head of firmware development at 9 Elements and founder of the OSFW Foundation, apologized for the possibility that his participation in the discussions might be perceived as arrogance and clarified some technical details. Malabal's claim that they provided a ready-made solution that only needed debugging is not true, as the firmware version sent did not boot on the laptop provided. 9 Elements employees had to complete and install the firmware themselves in order to boot the laptop with it. After loading, the firmware turned out to be non-working and the board did not exit the reset state, and there was no talk of any final debugging at this stage of firmware development. The 9 Elements company did not take any money for the work carried out with the proposed firmware and returned the sent device. The correspondence archive and conversations are saved, and Christian is ready to provide them as evidence of the groundlessness of Malabal's statements. You've been listening to Full Circle Weekly News. For more details, see the next issue of the magazine at fullcirclemagazine.org or check the links in the show notes. You can contact me directly at bardmoss@pm.me. I'll see you next week.